This podcast is a proud member of the Paranormality Podcast Network. Welcome to Paranormality, paranormal podcasts we listen to. I'm your host, Jack Kirby. Be sure to check us out on all our social media, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and our Facebook group. All the links will be in the show notes. If there's a paranormal, conspiracy, horror, or sci-fi podcast that you want me to interview, go ahead and send me an email, paranormalityradio@gmail.com. The link will also be in the show notes. On this episode of Paranormality, I sat down with Jared, Nick, and Samantha from the Even the Podcast is Afraid. We had a great interview. I thank you guys for coming on. So without further ado, let's get into that. Hello and welcome everybody.
Hey, thanks for having us, Jack.
Yeah, thank you.
Hello.
So before we get into this, can you guys describe your podcast and what you guys do and how you do it?
Yeah. So I feel like our podcast is one of a kind because we put like our own twist on so many subjects such as true crime, paranormal, creepypasta, and we throw a little bit of history in there too. I think that what makes us stand out the most is our creepypasta episodes because we take these stories that we found on the internet and we put a lot of comedic relief in them and throw in our 2 cents whenever we feel like it's necessary. And we feel like we never take it too seriously. And I feel like a lot of people enjoy that.
I really enjoy that about your show.
Our creepypasta seems to be like the most popular episodes, and like we enjoy doing it because, and you know what, once in a while, like the one we recorded last week, the story I just happened to find by fluke was like one of the best ones we read on the pod, if not the best one we read on the podcast.
That was my favorite, honestly.
That one was the one about the grandma who was into the weird.
Yeah, the grandma's dark
secrets.
Yes.
Oh, that was the best.
That was an amazing. I was in the car with my wife listening to that, and she's like, "No."
Well, the thing is, I know Sam usually like she'll read through the story a little bit first, but like me and Ordis, we don't read them. We just kind of pick it based on the title or however, and go that way. So that way we're experiencing it with our listeners, I guess.
Right. Yeah, I like to read through just a little bit just to make sure that it's good and that it's not just pure trash that I'm about to read. So like I do like to read just a little bit, but the last creepypasta that we did, I didn't read that one. The shoulder walkers, I didn't read that
garbage.
One. And it was garbage. It was garbage. See, this is why I do that.
I mean, some people can title their creepypastas and have amazing titles, and then the story just sucks.
Right. Yeah. And that's what hooked me was the shoulder walkers, because I was like, oh, that sounds really cool. It kind of sounds like the walkers from like The Walking Dead and stuff. So I was like, oh, I think that'd be a great story. And then of course I read it, and yeah, it didn't live up to the hype.
I had the worst of the episode though. Hands down. Mine was like a fucking Lifetime film.
It was a good story. It just wasn't a good creepy story.
Right. But overall, overall, it was a great episode. I loved it.
Yeah.
No, it was. Your creepypasta episodes are great. And one of the things I really like about your creepypastas is at the end, you go and rate them.
Yeah.
That was something we kind of started doing on a whim. I think it was Ordis brought it up one episode. He's like, okay, what would you guys give this out of 5?
Right. And then we just kind of went on with it.
Yeah, the idea behind it when I came up with the idea for doing creepypastas was it was kind of on a whim because I had originally created a show called Creeper. And it was, I read creepypastas in like a creepy voice or whatever. And then I said, well, everybody's fucking doing this shit. I want to do something different. And I like to laugh and I like funny. and it just came up with the idea, why don't we just read creepypastas? We can riff on them, and then we can actually rate them on whether or not they're good. And make it a random event with the actual story that you pick. And you don't have to go in there and actually know what the story is. You're just picking one.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think that's literally what makes it unique too. I really like doing the creepypastas. Especially
since like the ones I find too, like some of the ones I bring interesting different ones as opposed to like just like weird paranormal stuff. Like I like the ones that are like, you know, like my Pokemon Black one. That was the first one I read.
Yeah.
Where it was Pokemon, something I grew up and still to this day love. But like there was like a weird, creepy twist to it. Because I remember when I first read that about 10 years ago, and I left reading it. I'm like, oh, that's eerie. Like I kind of got this like weird, like feeling after reading it the first time. So I like those ones, like the lost episode ones, and just things kind of like rooted in like video games and, you know, just like non-paranormal things, but like paranormal things that kind of happen as a result of these things.
Right. I love when you pick one of the stories, Nick, and Ordis is just like, he is completely lost the whole time, especially if it's like a video game or like The Simpsons or the Pokemon thing, and he's just like, what is going on? Like, I have no idea what's going on.
Yeah, Nick, I love how you throw the Simpsons references in.
I am a Simpsons geek. In the before times when we were allowed to gather with people, I did go to like a monthly Simpsons trivia contest every month. We never won because like some of these questions are like insanely hard, and you have to spend your entire life just watching The Simpsons. But like being a group of friends, we all diehard Simpsons fans, like the classic seasons, and we used to do the Simpsons trivia thing back in the day.
Nice. I don't think I've ever been to a strictly Simpsons only trivia, but I'm sure there is so much that you can ask throughout the 30 years that it's been on.
They've been, these ones, they cater to just seasons 1 to 11. So like just the classic era, the good era. But like they've been doing, I think like 6, 7 years, 8 years maybe now. So like they just have like, some of the questions they ask too are just like, you have to be like watching frame by frame to pick up some of these things.
I don't watch The Simpsons that carefully. I really don't. I would totally tank at that. They'd have to ask me an easy question like, how many fingers does Bart have?
There you go.
I think we could all get that one.
You'd be surprised.
There's only one Simpsons character with 5 fingers. Do you know who it is?
It's God.
Yes.
Nice.
I'd have never fucking known that.
Yeah, I would have never.
Where can people find your podcast at?
You can find our podcast. We have eventhepodcastisafraid.com, which is our website, but we're available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, anywhere that you can find a podcast. We're there.
One of the really amazing things to me about your podcast is that you guys are so far away from each other. Jared, you're in Alabama?
Yeah, Alabama.
And then Nick's in Canada.
Yep.
And then Samantha, you're in my neck of the woods in Florida.
Yep, absolutely.
So how did you guys come together to make a podcast?
Well, I've known Ordis. We've known each other a couple years now.
Yeah.
And Ordis used to stream on Twitch, and I still do stream on Twitch. And I joined his Discord, his gaming Discord, and we kind of hit it off there, and kind of moved up in the Discord there, and then eventually Ordis like, I want to do a podcast. Would you be interested in being like a guest on the first episode? And I'm like, sure. And kind of took off from there, where I kind of became, instead of a guest, he just couldn't get rid of me.
Yeah, you went straight to co-host by episode 4.
Yeah.
Well, when I started, so it started out as first I was asked to join on the Twitch stream that Ordis did. He was doing like a horror-based episode. So it was me and another gentleman named Boogie, and we all basically hit it off really well, and I absolutely loved the show. So when Ordis asked me to become a permanent co-host, I was more than excited to join. And I had done a podcast before, even the podcast is afraid, but it was more of a hobby thing than anything else. And it never went really far. But this, I'm like totally into. This is like my neck of the woods and stuff. And so that's how it all started.
Well, I can tell because you have a great chemistry together. You can play off each other, and it makes it really fun to listen to.
Thank you. We appreciate that.
My next question is, have any of you ever had a paranormal experience?
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
See, I haven't because I know Ordis, he's lived in like old houses and stuff. My current house is a brand new house. We're the first owners of this house. My childhood home, we were the first owners. Brand new house. So I haven't really experienced anything. I think the closest I've had ever was a time in about 2000. My uncle at the time, he was really, really sick with cancer. Like he was on his last legs. And I was back home. My uncle lives up northern Ontario in Sudbury. So it's like 5 hours away from where I live. And I remember walking down to the basement. I just see this like flash of light kind of flash by my eyes. And I didn't really think anything of it. I'm like, oh, that's kind of weird. That's never happened before. But I just kind of brushed off whatever. Continue doing what I'm doing. 5 minutes later, my mom calls me to tell me my uncle died. So I think might have been, I don't know, something that's the closest I can say that I've had to a paranormal experience.
I had something very, very similar happen to me when my grandma died. She was in the hospital, and I was at work and I couldn't leave. And on my lunch break, it was weird. It was like, for just a split second, I swear I saw her. And then when I got to the hospital, they told me she had died when I was on lunch.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was pretty much the exact same thing. Exactly.
I would definitely consider that paranormal then.
There we go. Had
absolutely.
a paranormal experience.
Yeah, I've always been a fan of the paranormal since I was young. Just because I have had a lot of experiences. And it's funny, Nick, that you say that you've lived in like newer houses. Well, the house that I'm in was a newer house. We had just gotten it built, and it was around when I was, and Ordis, I think you've heard this story before, but I think I was around like 12 or 13, and I was laying on my air mattress horizontally looking at the floor. And as I was looking down at the floor, I see my shadow on the ground, and right next to it was a shadow of a man just standing right next to it. And it was really weird how detailed the shadow was too, because I could tell it was like a masculine figure. But it was just standing there, and it didn't move or disappear. So for my first reaction naturally was to close my eyes in hopes that it would just go away. But as soon as I opened them again, it was just standing there. So of course I just booked it out of my room and ran downstairs. And then after that incident, I had never saw it again. But then a couple years later after the incident, my mom told me one night she was checking up on me. I was sleeping, and she went into my room, and she said that she saw a black figure standing next to my bed watching me sleep. And she said that when she had noticed it, that's when it kind of just disappeared. And then after that, I had never seen it again. So I have no idea what that thing was or why it was like following me. It was freaky.
Yeah, that's when you just burn the house down, cut your losses.
Yeah.
Move, start a new life.
But nothing happened after that. It was just like two weird like incidents, and then after that it was just gone. So I have no idea what happened. Maybe it got bored or something, and it was just like, oh, I'm bored here. I'm gonna go and ask somebody else.
It's the original Floridian toe sucker is what it is.
It is.
Yeah.
He was waiting by the bed. Then he saw my mom come in. He was like, oh shoot, I gotta get out of here.
Do you want to find other great paranormal, conspiracy, horror, and sci-fi podcasts? Visit paranormalityradio.com and check out our paranormal podcast directory.
I've had several experiences with the paranormal. The first one, happened when I was a kid. I was probably about 13 years old. I was in middle school, and we lived in a really old house here in the town. The town I live in is called Slapout, Alabama. I know it's a crazy name, but the the house we lived in is one of the oldest homes here in our small town, and it was not an evil ghost or an evil spirit or anything of that nature. Just weird things would happen. You would hear the footsteps, the doors would slowly close or open, my closet door would open, things like that. Nothing crazy. And I know I've talked about the craziest house I've lived in on our podcast, and as well on I talked about it on Crawl Space. And this one was more recent. It was about 2011, and the house was built in the late 1800s, and it's in a place called Wetumpka, Alabama. And when I only lived there for 4 months, that's how long it took me to leave. Me and my dad both were staying there. We were renting the rooms upstairs. And these old houses from the 1800s, they're really big rooms. They all have fireplaces in them. They're tall ceilings. And typically when you go up the grand staircases that are in these old homes, you have a door. And there's a door that usually separates the upstairs from the downstairs. And the first time I ever noticed anything, I worked late at night, and I would come home around 11 o'clock at night. I worked at a place called Coach's Corner. It's a bar and grill. And so I always came home late. And who is now my wife would never enter this house. She never would go in this house. Even when I first moved in, she's like, I'm not going in there. This shit's creepy. I ain't going in there. Well, stuff started happening. You would start hearing the footsteps late at night. You would start hearing something coming up the stairs. I would hear that door open at the top of the stairs. Probably within, 2 weeks of living there, that's when I saw the doorknob turn to my bedroom. It turned, the door opened, and you could hear the footsteps going through. Well, I had another room attached to the room I lived in. And the only way to get to that room was through my room. There was another door at in this big ass room all the way on the other side. That door would open, turn, and then you would hear the footsteps in there, and then it would stop. And stuff got gradually worse over time. And instead of just the doorknob turning and the door slowly open, the door would fling open. The door would slam. TV would turn on by itself. I've had the lights flicker. I've had the one time that really, the first time that I ever saw it that scared the shit out of me was when the door slung open, and instead of the slow walking across the floor, you heard running across the floor. The door slung open on the other side of the room, and then it slammed. I'm like, what the fuck is up with this room on the other side? And the point, I heard something talk to me. I had something touch my face. I came home one night from work and saw an indentation in the end of my bed, like somebody is sitting on the end of my bed. It got to the point to where I said, I can't do this anymore. I got to go. And when I moved out, my father did not believe me, Jack, at all. And he was in the room across the hall. Nothing had happened to him. He thought it was me slamming doors and shit and would always tell me to stop doing it. And after I moved out, a week later, his bathroom light kept coming on by itself in his room. My dad moved out 3 weeks after me because something grabbed his feet at the end of the bed. I have never been back in that house since, and I don't want to go back in that house.
It took you 4 months. I would have been out in 2 weeks.
Well, the beginning of it was fine. It didn't really bother me because I'd lived in that house. There was another haunted house we'd lived in, and it didn't bother me. Like, the ghost present doesn't bother me. Whatever this was bothered me.
Did you do any research on that property?
I did do some research on the property to try to find out what it was. The reason that room is so interesting in the back was supposedly there was a suicide committed in that back room.
Oh, well, that would explain it. So there's a lot of evilness.
There's some other stuff too that I found out. I don't know if it's true, that goes back to supposedly slave times around that house as well.
Mm-hmm.
That supposedly the wife was pregnant by a slave, and supposedly she was murdered, and so was the slave on that property. So I don't know how true that story is, but the only thing I could find was that a suicide was committed possibly in that back room. So I ain't going back in that house. The house creeps shit out of it. No.
I don't blame you.
My house was built like 3 years ago, or started building 3 years ago, so it has zero history.
See, that's the weird thing too, because my house, we had it built, and so it wasn't like an old house. So I don't know where that thing came from. I don't know if it like followed me from somewhere. Like, I don't know. It was really freaky because it was a brand new house, and we thought that maybe it's like built on like ancient burial ground or something. I don't know. It was really odd.
Apparently my high school was haunted.
Really?
Apparently it was built on ancient burial grounds, but it's just like, when you're there with like, there were like 2,000 students at that school, so you're not really going to notice anything. But like all the teachers would say, if you're there at night and it's just you, it's creepy.
Just admit it, Nick. It was built on a former Tim Hortons.
Listen, the town I'm from didn't even have a Tim Hortons.
Speaking of Tim Hortons, did you play the little cup weird game that you guys do up there?
So here's what happened: is Tim Hortons really screwed it this year. So the company that owns Tim Hortons is now an American-based company. They're the same company that owns Burger King, and they have this new like rewards program that like they're copying McDonald's. McDonald's has, you buy 7 coffees, you get your next one free kind of thing. So Tim Hortons tried doing the same thing, and then they realized like, oh, we're losing money doing this. So they delayed the start of, usually it starts in January, roll up the rim, and they delayed it to like March, and then COVID happened. And they're like, okay, well, we don't want to like, have you passing your used rims to the employees. So for those who don't know what roll up the rim is, you get a cup of coffee from Tim Hortons every year, and the little rim at the top, you flip it up and you can win a prize. Usually win free food, there's cars, there's barbecues, there's all sorts of stuff you can win there.
Leafs tickets?
No, not Leaf tickets. No. Believe it or not Leaf tickets. But so because the COVID stuff happened, they're like, okay, we're not going to accept the rims anymore. Everything's just going to be digital. Like, you get the buy your coffee, you scan, you get this thing called it's like a Tim's reward card. And then it's connected to the app on the phone. It got really complicated because you had to have a card, and then it was connected to your app. And then you have to keep in mind, the majority of people who like frequent Tim Hortons are, older people, 60, 70 years old kind of thing. So I don't think it went too well for them. I only had one rim because not long after that, I, was not let go, but like my shifts were put on hold because of COVID. So I haven't had any need to go to Tim Hortons. So I had one rim and I lost. So
damn that COVID-19. It
ruins everything. Ruins everything. But yeah, I did have a lengthy rant about that on one of our podcasts.
So, Jared, do you think that your paranormal experiences happened because of the area that you live in?
It's possible. I mean, there's, in the town that I live in now there is some houses from Civil War times that are around here. There's actually a house that's about 7 or 8 minutes from me that the person who actually owned the house is buried in the front yard.
What?
So, yeah, you have to step over his grave in order to get in the house. He did that purposely.
No, thank you.
That is so creepy.
He fought in the Civil War, and he is buried in the front yard. Yeah.
Nice.
I think it does have a lot to do. There's a lot of history in the state of Alabama. I don't know. Plus you also have here, I'm Creek Indian, I'm Native American, and the Muskogee Nation, the Creek Nation was here. Pretty much the majority of the state was taken over. It was Creek Nation. This was even during the time with Andrew Jackson. So there's no telling the amount of history even prior to that had gone on in the state. And plus, we also have. I'll even go even further. We are considered part of Wetumpka, Alabama. Now, Wetumpka, Alabama, when you put into the history books, is also home to Fort Toulouse. It's also home to the French and Indian War. There's a lot of history.
It's interesting to me. It really is. Because, you go back and you see all the horrible things that happened and you're like, yeah, I can see why there's some dick running through my house in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
Trying to sleep, slamming doors.
Yeah. Not even paying the bills.
I mean, that's not even like up here, even in Slap Out, there's always been this legend that I'm sure you enjoy cryptids and that kind of stuff as well too, Jack.
Oh, yes.
Okay. So up here we have what's called the Alabama White Thing, which is like a Bigfoot, a Sasquatch, a Yeti. And we used to spend the night, which is called the B14 area. And the B14 area up here in Slap Out has a really bloody and dark history, especially during the civil rights movement and things of that nature. It was pretty much Klan territory, and there was a lot of murders and things like that done to the African American community back there that should have never been done. But it is very spooky back there with things that happen. Like there in the wooded areas back there, you will find numerous things that you have no rhyme or reason they should be there. Like we have found shoes, piled up shoes in the woods. There's cars back there. We have found appliances. We have found you name it, we have found it. And one of the pairs of shoes that we actually found was from the 40s.
What? Really?
Yeah, so we have found some really old shoes back there. But we used to go camping in those woods. And there's always been this story about the Alabama White Thing. And the sound that a Bigfoot makes, I've heard it more than once out of them woods as we've spent the night in those woods. And this scream or holler that this thing or entity would make would do it for every single person we had in camp. So, of course, we tested this theory out. We're like, we're going to take different amount of people camping every single time. So the first time we went, it was 3 of us. It screamed 3 times. We heard the holler 3 times. So the next time we took 5 people, did it 5 times. The next time we took 4 people, did it 4 times. Every single time, it got the same amount correct. That's not even including all this shit started when we found a tombstone that was split directly in half in the woods in separate different locations. So we found the first one that had the person's name, Bonnie, and then later on, a couple weeks later, we found the other half of the tombstone that had Brown, her last name. We brought them back up to the house, put them together, then we started having weird shit happen.
Why did you camp in those woods?
Yeah.
Intrigued. I told you, I'm not really scared of.
And you went back. That's the kicker. You went back multiple
Interesting
times.
enough, the person I used to go in those woods with, he still owns that property. And recently, about 3 months ago, we had talked about doing it again. And we have not camped in those woods since the 9th grade.
Ooh, man, that's scary.
I'll do something twice. Like if I go out somewhere and something weird or paranormal or creepy happens to me, I'm going to go back out there at least one more time to see if I can recreate that. Right.
Yeah, I don't blame you. Usually if it happens to me once, I'm done. I'm like, yeah, no, I'm good. I'm out of here. But Florida, speaking of like Bigfoot and stuff and cryptids, Florida has the Florida swamp ape.
Yes, it does.
I don't know if you've heard. Yeah, if you heard about that, and that's basically like Florida's Bigfoot, and it does that same noise too, that Bigfoot noise, that like roar or whatever it does. It's like you can't even explain it. But I've seen like multiple videos about it, and it's pretty freaky.
I forget his name, but he's a famous Bigfoot researcher. He's been on like the Sci-Fi Network, Discovery Channels, whatever. He has a place down in South Florida, in Big Cypress State Park because he hunts for the skunk ape there.
Oh, that's awesome. Man, I got to tell my boyfriend about that because he's huge into Bigfoot and like the skunk ape and all that stuff. So I got to tell him about that. That's pretty cool.
So I have a question for you, Samantha.
All right.
You live particularly close to a certain Air Force base that is supposedly does a lot of alien and space projects come out of there. Have you ever seen a UFO or anything in your area?
No, not particularly. Are you talking about MacDill?
Yes.
Okay. No. Now I have seen where they've done like at night where they're doing the training, and at first I'm like, I like if I'm walking my dogs at night and I see like 3 little lights in the sky, I'm like, but then my dad, he always tells me, he's like, no, they're just training, Sam, they're not UFOs.
That's what he wants you to think.
Yeah, that's what I know, right?
Your dad
And, like,
drinking the Kool-Aid.
yeah. Yeah, so I mean, I've seen like weird lights, but then like I end up finding out that it's usually some training or something. But yeah, I don't think I've seen anything strange, not too strange. What about you?
I'm in Sarasota. We have the Bradenton Sarasota Airport. So it's really kind of hard to distinguish because at night they still have flights coming in until about 3 a.m. I haven't seen anything personally, but I've heard a lot of stories that MacDill does test flights for UFOs and extraterrestrial stuff.
I never knew that. And the funny thing is that I have a coworker, her husband works at MacDill. So I wonder if he knows something. Maybe I can like pry some stuff from her and let you know.
I heard that Air Force base and the one in Illinois, it's on the border of Illinois and St. Louis. It's called Scott Air Force Base. And a while back, they were going to shut that base down, and they opted not to, and they tripled its funding. I've actually seen stuff in that area, like little triangled UFO-looking things that disappear whenever they move.
That's awesome. Yeah, I've never had a UFO experience, but I'll definitely let you know when I do.
That's because they probably like Men in Black, like, did the Flash thing.
Oh yeah,
you've probably seen like a bunch of them, and
I
in
know.
Alabama,
what if my dad
ground.
did that to me? like I see the 3 things like in the sky, and I'm like, Dad, are those UFOs? He's like, no, Sam, they're not UFOs. They're just doing testing. Pshum.
Yeah, then he flashy things you.
Yeah.
So what you're telling me is your dad is part of Men in Black.
Absolutely.
This is confirmed.
What's your favorite episode that you've done so far?
Oh man. Well, I'm gonna have a biased. I'm gonna have a biased one. It's an unreleased episode, so until Monday. But we are starting yesterday. We recorded part 1 of our 2-part series on Luca Magnotta, who is a killer up here in Canada, in Toronto. It's the first episode that I wrote and researched, and I really enjoyed it, especially since like all of like the specific locations they're talking about. I'm like, I've been there before. I know where that is. That's across the street from where I used to live.
I think my favorite episode is probably the most recent creepypasta episode, the one with the shoulder walkers, the yellow Ledbetter, and then the grandma's dark seeker. That was by far my favorite, just because all 3 of us had they were very like detailed stories, and for the most part they were good. And usually in our creepypastas, we usually have like 1 really good one and then 2 like hit or miss, or
one
all
good
3
one,
of us.
1 okay one, and then 1 just like ugh.
Yeah, basically. So that was really one of my favorites.
So when I was listening to that episode, I actually had to stop your podcast and find that song because my wife had no idea what it was.
Oh.
And she's like, how do I know that? Why do I know that? And I'm like, you know it. I'll play it for you. And she's like, no, you're gonna stop and play it for me now. So I had to stop the episode, play Yellow Ledbetter for her, and then I could finish.
That's funny.
Here's a fun fact. The song Yellow Ledbetter doesn't actually have any real lyrics. It's just Eddie Vedder singing kind of gibberish and kind of words because it's like an unfinished song. And a lot of musicians, they have like, words and phrases in that they're going to try to work in while they're trying to figure out their melodies. And Yellow Ledbetter has never been a finished song, but they played it on concerts and everyone loved it. So they put it on their greatest hits, but there's no actual like legit lyrics for the song.
I didn't think there was.
Yeah, because it is kind of like if you listen, he's kind of mumble. Like Eddie Vedder has like this mumble to him, but he's like, "Oh, here, oh, poor her here."
What was that movie? Ted.
Ted, yeah.
Yeah, where he was basically doing karaoke, and he's like, "Yeah, if you can, you can do any '90s rock song."
Yeah. Well, I call it like his little like Eddie Vedder's grunts, Eddie Vedderisms.
It's creative.
I don't know what my favorite episode is. I've done a lot of research and a lot of the writing and stuff for a lot of the episodes, and I don't know. I really enjoyed the Joe Exotic series we just did. I was really enthralled with that. I spent literally 2 months in Joe Exotic land. Either that or I really enjoyed the episode we did on Georgia's Lake of the Dead, which is Lake Lanier. I really enjoyed that one as well with all the paranormal stuff and the weird stuff that happens around Lake Lanier in Georgia.
Yeah, that one was really cool. That was a cool
very
episode.
Interesting one. Yeah, because I never heard of that up until we did the episode. And just actually, you know what? I'm in the middle. I listen to our podcast and I'm like way behind because I'm not driving anywhere. But I am listening to that episode. Like that's the one that's on next. And yeah, I like it was just a very interesting story. It really was.
Yeah, Jeremy, so my boyfriend, because he grew up in Georgia and he went to that lake and he didn't know. So I told him about the podcast, he listened to it and he was like shocked because he was like, he didn't know anything about that, about like the underwater graves and stuff. He was shocked. He was like, what? He's like, I've swam in that lake before. Like, what? Yeah, it was pretty funny.
My favorite episode that you guys have done was the Slender Man.
Oh, yes.
And unfortunately, Samantha wasn't in it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's why it's his favorite, because I wasn't in it.
No, it's because there was a bunch of insane, crazy little fucking bitches.
Right.
I was just thinking of that story the other day. And I remember when it came out, like when I saw like the news article about it, I thought it was like an Onion article at first. I thought it was a joke. I'm like, what? Someone sacrificed a sled? What? And I clicked. I'm like, oh shit, this is real. And I remember kind of sort of following that case for a little bit back in the day because it was just so bizarre.
Yeah, I saw that and I was like, yeah, I thought the same thing. I'm like, no, this is a joke. No, that can't be real.
Yeah. Yeah, it did seem like a joke at first. Because I was like, why? I was like, no way. Because it was so, it was just so out of the blue. And just so random. And I was like, yeah, this can't be real. And then come to find out it was. I was like, oh my gosh, people are crazy.
And see, when I was researching that episode and going through everything when I was writing it, I was trying to really get the picture of the mental state, really, of Morgan. As obviously you listened to the episode, you said it's your favorite episode, and I really dived in writing on her the most because her mind, and supposedly until this day, she still believes she did the right thing.
That's so fucked up.
Yeah.
And she's diagnosed with schizophrenia like 12 or 13 or whatever it was. And we talked about this in the Luca Magnotta episode that's coming out on Monday. That like it's one of the youngest diagnoses of schizophrenia like on record. Because usually you don't really get the diagnosis until you're in your 20s.
Right. And her dad had schizophrenia too, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's why I brought it up in the upcoming Luca Magnotta when, because I said somebody's gonna fucking call me out and say I'm wrong or something. But I said, I've read somewhere that schizophrenia is hereditary.
Yes.
That if one person, if the parent has it, they can transfer it to their child.
That has been a proven fact, yes.
There you go.
So
Facts
nobody's
are
going to
correct.
write me a fuck you letter.
Yeah.
Oh, no, they'll probably still write you a fuck you letter, but no, that has actually been a proven fact that schizophrenia is hereditary.
And that was something I had learned on that podcast episode because I was like, no way. Like, that's crazy. I had no idea.
What is something that your podcast listeners don't know about you yet?
Oh, geez.
That's
See,
that's a good question.
Nick's Canadian.
Yes, I'm Canadian. The truth is out there. Yep, I'm Canadian. Yeah, I don't know. I'm usually pretty open because I don't like. There's nothing really I hide.
Right.
I really don't know. I mean, my dog's getting shaved tomorrow. That's
That's how exciting. For me, I guess. I mean, I know I don't look like it, but I am Hispanic, 100% Hispanic, and I can speak. I can speak it. I can read it. I'm half Puerto Rican, half Cuban. And yeah, that's pretty much it. I don't think anything else like exciting.
I've got one. I've been learning Swedish.
Oh, that's pretty.
Yep, I can speak some Swedish. I probably butcher the language, but I've been doing it for the last like few years, just kind of like as an interesting thing, and I just kind of stuck with it, and I enjoy. I can read it pretty well. I mean, I'm sure if I went to Sweden and tried speaking Swedish, they would look at me funny, but also they can mostly speak English there too. So, but yeah, it's I enjoy it. I'm also trying to learn Italian because I do have an Italian background.
So have you ever tried to find somebody who speaks Swedish online and have a conversation with them just to...
I have. Okay, so one of the big Twitch streamer I watch, he is from Sweden, and every April Fool's Day, he does a stream where he speaks Swedish. He does the entire stream in Swedish, and then he'll play Swedish games. And I can like, there are Swedish people who watch him. They speak in Swedish. I'm like, oh, I can actually like follow along, and then I can kind of like join the chat and do whatever. The only problem is I don't have the accents on my keyboard, so I've got to go through like the character map and find the thing. So it takes me forever to actually type a sentence. But yeah, so I mean, I've done things like that. I've seen some Swedish streamers, and they'll notice them in chat. They're like, oh, hi, and I'm just like, sorry, I don't know how to speak Swedish well. And it's like, förlåt, jag kan inte parla. No, I'm speaking Italian now. Jag kan inte prata I svenska, and they're like, oh, okay, it's fine.
That's pretty awesome,
Yeah,
though.
He said he likes nuts.
Yeah. Yep.
But yeah, that's pretty cool that you're learning another language. I actually, Ariana and I, my best friend, we were learning Korean for a little bit. I mean, this was back in like high school though, but we had gotten pretty far to where we could have like a small conversation with each other, and we can kind of understand like little words here and there in like a conversation. So it was pretty cool. But then for some reason we just stopped. But I would love to learn another language.
I do not know another language whatsoever. I can speak English fairly well. That's about it.
And then because I'm Canadian, I also know French. I mean, I can't speak it at all, but I can read it pretty well because it's everywhere.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's good. I took French for 2 years and I passed it with like flying colors. But let me tell you, I did not retain hardly anything from those classes.
I was required to take French from grade 4 to grade 9. And I don't remember any of it. So,
Well, I took Spanish and I retained taco and quesadilla.
That's all you.
it.
Those are the important words. That's it. Like hola, quesadilla, and taco. That's it.
oh, when I went to Mexico, the most important sentence: "Dos cervezas, por favor."
But going back to your previous question, Jack, I'm pretty open to. I'm kind of like Nick. I pretty much just air my laundry. I mean, I don't. There's nothing. I've talked about my heritage before on the hell. I think I talked the was it Bell Witch? When we did the
Mhm.
Bell Witch episode, I talked about my history there. I think most people don't know I'm married. I actually have one son. I have a second child on the way who's due coming in September, so another son coming.
Congratulations.
He's
Thank
gonna
you.
name him Nick.
No, I'm not. I don't know. I'm a huge history buff. I don't just like true crime, paranormal, and unexplained. I'm really big into history. I'm a documentary whore. I love documentaries. Like if somebody asks me to watch a movie or a documentary, I'm always going to choose documentary.
I actually fall asleep to documentaries every night and then watch them when I wake up, wherever I fell asleep at. So one last question. What is your favorite podcast right now?
Oh, that's easy. Last podcast on the left.
Yep, that's mine. Last podcast on the left is the one. When Ordis brought up like the podcast, he's like, "Hey, do you listen to last podcast on the left?" I'm like, "No, like I know who they are, but I've never really listened to them." He's like, "Okay, listen," because they did the series on the Mormons.
Yeah,
and that was the first episodes I listened. I was at work listening, and I was dying. I'm like, this is great. This is great stuff. So yeah, they're one of my favorite podcasts. If not, there's another one, the ongoing history of new music by Alan Cross. Is if you're a music buff, Alan Cross is a Canadian music journalist, and he's been doing it since like 1992 or something like that. And he's got a whole whack of everything on a lot of the music from like the grunge era to classic rock to a lot of like, then of course like he's got like the Canadian bands in there too, just because like he is a Canadian journalist. But the guy is he's all over social media. If you email him, he will get back to you. And this guy, like, he knows everything about the industry. So that's one of my other favorite podcasts.
See, mine has to be Welcome to Night Vale. And it was actually the first podcast I had ever listened to, and it's still one of my favorites to this day. And if you don't know what that is, it's basically like a radio broadcast for a fictional town where they talk about weather, news, and crazy stories that happen in this fictional town. And they've like created this whole lore around it. It's really awesome. And like the artwork is so beautiful. And it's awesome, like some of the stories that they come up with and how wacky they can get. And the guy who narrates these scripts has like a really captivating voice. It's like very soothing, but like creepy. But yeah, that's definitely my favorite podcast for sure.
Before we get out of here, how can everybody find you guys one more time?
You can find us at eventhepodcastisafraid.com. You can also find us wherever you get your podcasts, including Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher. We're literally everywhere. I think it's like 30 plus apps now. You can also find us on Twitter at Podcast Afraid, and you can also find me at Ordis89. Nick, Sam.
You can find me at the Nixter15 if you don't mind a lot of my sports rants. That's where you can find me.
And you can find me at SpookySam8 on Twitter.
Well, I'd like to thank you once again for taking the time out to come on the show. It was great having you.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
It was a great time.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
It was a blast.
And that's going to do it for today's episode. If you like the show, the best way you can help the show grow is to share it with all your friends. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. Go knock on your neighbor's door. And until next time, I'm Jack.